That was the morning. Lena stopped pretending everything was fine. She had been sitting in a waiting room chair at St. Michael's Hospital in Toronto for 3 hours, wearing the same cardigan she'd had on since Tuesday. Her hair pulled back into something that wasn't quite a ponytail anymore. A paper cup of cold coffee balanced on her knee. The results had come back. The doctor had used words like early stage and manageable, and we caught it. But Lena had stopped hearing anything after the word mass. She was 34 years old. She had a mortgage, a husband named Trevor, and apparently a small but very real problem growing in her left breast. She reached for her phone and called him before she'd even left the examination room. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey," she said. "So I just finished, they found something." There was a pause, a short one. Then Trevor said, "Okay, what does that mean exactly?" "It means I need a biopsy. It means I have to come back Thursday. It means," her voice broke a little at the edges. "It means I'm scared, Trevor." Another pause. She heard him exhale. She heard the faint sound of a hockey game in the background. "Okay, well, try not to panic before you know anything for sure." A beat. "Hey, did you end up making that lasagna before you left this morning? Because I invited Garrett and some of the guys over tonight, and I kind of told them dinner would be ready around 7. Lena sat in that examination room for a very long time after she hung up. She stared at the anatomy poster on the wall. She stared at the stirrups on the examination table. She thought about the fact that she had been married to Trevor Kowalski for 6 years, and in those 6 years, she had cooked approximately 2,000 meals, attended every one of his company dinners, driven his mother to her physiotherapy appointments every other Wednesday for 8 months, and ironed his shirts on Sunday evenings while he watched sports. She thought about the fact that when she was 28, she had been accepted into a graduate program in urban planning at the University of Waterloo. She had deferred. Trevor had just been promoted. They were buying the house. The timing wasn't right. She'd go next year. Next year became the year after. The year after became never, but quietly, the way things become never when no one ever says it out loud. She thought about the word mass. Then she stood up, buttoned her coat, and made a decision. She didn't go home to make lasagna. Lena had grown up in Sudbury, the younger of 2 daughters in a family that was not unkind but not especially warm either. Her father, Ron, was a shift supervisor at a paper mill. Her mother, Joan, had worked part-time at a pharmacy until Lena and her sister Amber were both in high school, at which point she went full-time and seemed for the first time genuinely happy. Lena had noticed that, even at 15, she had noticed that her mother became a different person when she had somewhere to be in the morning that was hers. She'd carried that observation with her all through university, through her undergraduate degree in environmental studies at Laurentian, through the part-time jobs and the student loans and the years of figuring out who she wanted to be. She was not a person who had ever imagined herself as a housewife. That was not the word she would have used to describe her future. She was going to work. She was going to build something. She had plans. Then she met Trevor at a friend's wedding in Barrie when she was 26. And Trevor was charming and funny and handsome in a very straightforward way, and he looked at her like she was the most interesting person in the room. And within 18 months they were engaged. She could not have told you exactly when the balance shifted. It happened the way most things happen in a marriage. Gradually, then completely, then retroactively. It seemed obvious. Trevor's job required him to travel. Lena's job at the environmental consulting firm was flexible. Someone had to be home for the plumber, for the cable guy, for Trevor's mother when she had her hip replaced. Someone had to keep the household running. Lena was good at it. She was organized. She didn't mind. She said that so often, "I don't mind," that after a while she stopped noticing she was saying it at all. The graduate school deferral was the clearest line she could draw, looking back. But there were smaller ones. The job offer from a firm in Ottawa she'd turned down, because Trevor didn't want to leave Toronto. The girls' trip to Portugal she'd canceled, because his work conference landed the same weekend, and someone needed to water the plants and collect the mail. The Thursday evening pottery class she'd signed up for and attended exactly twice before Trevor's comment about the mess of clay on the kitchen table made her feel obscurely guilty enough to stop going. None of it was shouted. None of it was cruel in a way you could point to. Trevor was not a bad man. He was a man who had simply never been required to consider whether his comfort was coming at someone else's expense, and so he never had. By the time Lena was 34 and sitting in a hospital waiting room, she had become someone she almost didn't recognize. She had become someone who asked permission for things she didn't need permission for. Someone who prefaced every sentence about her own needs with, "I know this is probably not a big deal, but..." Someone who had learned to measure the temperature of Trevor's mood before deciding whether she was allowed to be upset about something. She hadn't seen it clearly until the phone call. That moment, him asking about the lasagna while she was still holding the news about the mass in both hands, was the first time she had seen it clearly and completely, the way you sometimes need a shock to make a lens come into focus. She drove home. She parked in the driveway. She sat in the car for 20 minutes without going inside. Then she called her sister Amber. Amber was 3 years older and lived in Halifax with her husband Devin and their 2 kids. She was a nurse, which was either the best or worst profession to have when your younger sister calls you from a hospital parking lot. And she answered on the first ring, because she always answered on the first ring, when Lena called from an unknown number. Lena told her everything: the mass, the biopsy, the phone call with Trevor, the lasagna. When she finished, there was a silence on Amber's end that was not the cold kind but the careful kind, the kind that meant her sister was choosing her next words with precision. "Lena," Amber said finally, "how long has it been like this?" "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." And she did. She did know what Amber meant. She went inside and she made the lasagna. Because 6 years of habit is a powerful thing, and because she didn't know yet how not to. But something had come loose in her. Some weight-bearing belief she'd been leaning on had cracked. She moved through the kitchen like a person who had just received news that changes everything and is still waiting for the feeling to catch up to the fact. Trevor's friends arrived at 7. They were loud and friendly in the way men are when there is beer and hockey. No one asked how her appointment had gone. She wasn't sure Trevor had mentioned it. She brought out the lasagna and the garlic bread and she smiled and she answered the questions directed at her. "Are you watching the playoffs, Lena? Trevor says you're a big Leafs fan." And she thought, "I am 34 years old and I went to a hospital alone today and came home to cook for 6 people who do not know my last name." Around 11, after everyone had gone, she was standing at the sink washing the dishes. Trevor came up behind her and put his hand on her shoulder. "Good night," he said. Everyone loved the food. She turned off the tap. "Trevor," she said, "I need you to come with me on Thursday." He frowned. He had an early call on Thursday. She knew that. Could she maybe reschedule? She looked at him for a long moment. "It's a biopsy," she said, "for the mass they found in my breast." "Right," he said. "Right, I know. But it's probably nothing, like the doctor said. And Garrett's team is coming in from Calgary." She dried her hands on the dish towel. She folded it carefully and set it on the counter. "Okay," she said, and she went upstairs. She did not sleep. She lay in the dark and she thought about something her mother had told her once, years ago, after Joan had gone back to work. She'd said, "The hardest part wasn't starting. The hardest part was admitting how much I'd lost by waiting." Thursday came. Trevor did not come with her. She drove herself to the hospital. She sat in the same chair in the same waiting room. This time she had brought a book, though she didn't read it. A woman across from her, older, maybe 60, gray hair in a neat braid, glanced at her a few times with the kind of knowing look that women give each other in medical waiting rooms, a look that said, "I see you, and I know this is hard, and you're not alone even though it feels that way." The biopsy was uncomfortable but not as bad as she'd feared. The nurse, a young woman whose name tag read Priya, held her hand during the part that hurt and said, "You're doing great, almost done." Such a small thing, such an enormous thing. Lena cried in the car afterward, not from pain but from the sheer relief of being somewhere she was allowed to be the person who needed help instead of the person who provided it. She called Amber on the way home. "I'm done," she said. Amber didn't ask her to clarify. That weekend, while Trevor was at a work thing in Mississauga, Lena drove to the library and got a library card. She hadn't had one since university. She took out 4 books, one on urban design, one novel, one book about women who had rebuilt their lives after 40, and one about the history of cities in Canada that she had wanted to read for 3 years and never let herself buy. She sat in the library for 2 hours. She read. She had a coffee from the little cart near the entrance. No one needed anything from her for 2 hours. It felt like taking her first breath in years. The biopsy came back benign. She sat in the doctor's office with the paper trembling slightly in her hands and she thought, okay, I have time. I have time to do this differently." She did not tell Trevor right away. She held the information for a full day, which was the first secret she had kept from him, though she understood almost immediately that it wasn't really a secret. It was just something that was hers before it became shared news. She was practicing, she realized. Practicing having something that belonged only to her. She told him that evening over dinner. He was relieved in the uncomplicated way of a person who had never truly let themselves believe it might be serious. He said, "See? I told you not to worry." And then he asked if she'd seen the remote. That night, she reopened the website for the University of Waterloo School of Planning. She read for 2 hours. She did not tell Trevor about that either. The first real fight happened 6 weeks later. Lena had registered for a single evening course, Introduction to Urban Planning Theory, offered online through continuing education. It cost $400. She paid for it from her own account, the small one she'd kept since before the marriage, that had a modest amount of her own earnings deposited into it every month from a few freelance research projects she'd taken on over the years. She had never spent from it without mentioning it to Trevor. This time she didn't mention it. He found out when the course notification email came up on the shared family laptop. He was not initially angry. He was confused. The confusion felt almost worse. "You're going back to school?" he said. "It's one course, one evening a week, but we didn't talk about this." "I know. So why didn't you?" "Because," she said, and she heard her own voice come out steady and unfamiliar. "Every time I've brought something up that I wanted, we've talked about it and then it hasn't happened. So I decided to do it first and talk about it second." Trevor stared at her. He looked genuinely surprised, not angry but startled, like she'd said something in a language he hadn't known she spoke. "That's not fair," he said. "No," she agreed. "A lot of things haven't been fair." It was the first time she had said anything like that directly. She had thought it thousands of times. She had turned it over in her head, in the car, in the shower, at the kitchen sink. But she had never said it to his face plainly without softening it. He did not take it well. He went quiet in the punishing way that she had always dreaded, the silence that meant she was supposed to feel guilty enough to walk it back. She had always walked it back before. She stood in the kitchen and waited for herself to apologize. She didn't. The course started on a Wednesday in October. She drove to the campus in the early evening, in the dark that comes early in Toronto by mid-fall, with her new notebook on the passenger seat, and her heart going faster than she thought it would. She was one of the older students. Most were in their mid-20s, but the professor, a woman named Dr. Osi, who wore enormous earrings and spoke with the kind of authority that Lena had always found deeply comforting, welcomed the class with a warmth that cut through the anxiety. They were asked to introduce themselves and say why they were there. When it was Lena's turn, she said, "I'm Lena. I put this off for a long time. I'm here because I stopped putting it off." A few people smiled. Dr. Osi nodded slowly, as if this was exactly the kind of answer she had been hoping to hear. On the drive home, Lena realized she was humming. She couldn't remember the last time she'd done that without noticing. Things at home did not improve quickly. They improved slowly and unevenly, and with a great deal of discomfort. Trevor adapted in stages. First came the sulking, which she had expected. Then came a period of pointed helpfulness. He cooked dinner twice in 1 week, made a comment about how he'd noticed she seemed stressed, asked if everything was okay in the tone of a man who suspects the answer is no, but is hoping to be reassured otherwise. She told him the truth. She wasn't stressed. She was changing. She wasn't sure yet what that would mean for them. He didn't like that answer. They went to couples counseling, because Lena asked and because Trevor, to his credit, and she tried to hold on to this, said yes. The therapist's name was Roger, and he was a quiet, patient man who had clearly heard many versions of this story and found none of them boring. He had a habit of asking Trevor questions that required him to imagine what an experience felt like from the inside, which was not a kind of thinking Trevor had practiced. It was slow. It was hard. There were sessions that ended in the parking lot, with both of them sitting in separate corners of the car, not speaking. But there were also sessions, not many but some, where Trevor said something that surprised her, where she saw, behind the defensiveness and the habit, a person who actually did not want to be the kind of man who had made his wife invisible, who had simply never understood that he was. Whether that would be enough, she didn't know yet. In March, Lena was accepted into the full graduate program. She had applied without telling Trevor. She had spent 3 Sunday evenings while he was watching the game working on her statement of purpose at the kitchen table, and it was the best writing she had done in years. Partly because she was writing it for herself, and partly because she had so much to say. She wrote about cities and belonging, about the difference between space that is built for everyone and space that is built for a specific kind of person, about why that difference mattered. When the acceptance letter came, she printed it out and set it on the kitchen table. Trevor found it before she could figure out how to bring it up. He stood at the table, reading it for a long moment. She watched his face. "You applied," he said. "I applied, and you got in. I got in." He set the paper down. He looked out the window at the backyard, at the garden she'd planted last spring, the one he'd said was a waste of time. He stood there for so long she thought he wasn't going to say anything. Then he said, I didn't know you still wanted this. I always wanted this, she said. I just stopped saying it because it didn't seem to change anything. He flinched. She hadn't said it to wound him. But she watched it land and she didn't take it back. She started the program in September, full time. She had gone back to work at the consulting firm 3 days a week, not for Trevor's sake but for her own, because she liked working, and liked having her own money, and liked being a person with a professional identity that wasn't attached to someone else's. The first week of classes, she called Amber every evening on the walk from the bus stop to the apartment she was now renting. Yes, apartment, separate from Trevor. Not divorce, not yet, but necessary. Necessary in the way that sometimes you have to step back from something to see it clearly enough to decide whether it is worth keeping. Amber listened. Amber always listened. She asked good questions and did not tell Lena what to do, which was exactly right. Are you happy? Amber asked, one evening in October when the leaves were at their best, and the city smelled like wood smoke and coffee. Lena stopped walking. She stood on the sidewalk in front of a bakery, with light spilling out from the window, and thought about the question seriously, the way it deserved to be thought about. I'm something better than happy, she said finally. I'm real again. Amber laughed, which was the right response. Trevor came to her apartment for dinner on a Thursday in November. She cooked. She still liked cooking. She'd just stopped liking cooking for people who didn't notice. And they sat at her small table and talked for a long time. Not about the marriage, not about logistics, just talked. The way they used to when they first met, when he still found her genuinely interesting and she still felt seen. It wasn't the same as it had been, but it wasn't what it had become either. She didn't know what would happen. She had stopped needing to know. She was 34 years old. She was in graduate school. She had a library card she actually used, and she had driven herself to a hospital alone in the summer and come home and made a decision that had changed the entire direction of her life. She thought sometimes about that woman in the waiting room, the one with the gray braid, who had given her the knowing look. She thought about what it would have meant, 6 years ago, to have seen her own future waiting for her in a chair like that. Tired and alone, and about to receive news that was frightening, and quietly starting to understand that the most frightening thing wasn't what the doctor had found, but how clearly that phone call had showed her what her life had actually become. She was grateful for it. That was a strange thing to be. Grateful for a mass that turned out to be nothing, for a phone call that broke something open. But she was. Some things need to break before they can be rebuilt into something better. She was building.